Hello, guys, girls, madams, all the above. Happy Friday. So I'm back. I didn't miss a Friday, but you know what? I figured if you guys watched my live last week, you were getting the first part of the topic that we're going to talk about today. So for me, I ended up getting COVID this past week. And so this is not my first rodeo. It was, I believe, my second, but it's been about almost 2 years since I have gotten COVID first time. But COVID has been a part of my life and everyone's lives since March of, so almost 3.5 years ago. And today I'm not going to talk about the statistics. I'm not going to talk about all the symptoms. We know, we've heard that, we've been exposed to that. But today I'm going to talk to you about the experience. What is the COVID experience from a mind, body, spirit perspective really like? Because a lot of times I find that, so as a social worker, as a clinical addiction specialist, as a mental health professional, whatever you want to call me, this video, if you're watching it, is really about making sure you're paying attention to yourself, because you may be experiencing what you're going through, but are you paying attention to what you're going through? Because more than likely you're not, because the brain is not built to actually naturally allow you to pay attention to yourself. It's having you pay attention to everything happening to you and how you're perceiving it. So when I put this video, when you watch this video, it's like, let's talk about what's really going on with you and see if you can connect with some of that. Because when you're going through it, there's a lot that's going, there's a lot that's happening. So I'm going to try to keep it short because I'm still also struggling with, I'm not COVID positive anymore. I got my first negative test. What's today, Friday? So it was on Wednesday evening, and Thursday, yesterday, I got my negative test. And it was almost like, oh my gosh, I'm out of jail. I'm out of COVID jail. So I'm going to break this down, but my energy levels are low. I just got done resting a whole lot, but it's also like, yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to break that down. So what I really want to just go ahead and make sure I remind you guys about, though, is like, if you're going through something mental health wise, please don't do this alone. That's why I'm making this content, to hopefully make you realize that this is not something that not only can you do alone, but to remember, you are not alone. That I've gone through COVID this week. I know a couple of people who have been struggling with it as well. And it really takes a toll. This is a very different breed of virus that has happened. Now, I'm going to put all of that mumbo jumbo, like I said, no statistics, no things, no, all the fluff about yes, you need to wear masks and wash your hands. That's a given. But we're not going to go into what the media is producing. We're really going to go into what the experience, what I've seen, not only experienced myself, but then also working with a lot of people as a therapist who have been impacted by COVID, what the common denominators and what maybe best practice to try to bring into your recovery from COVID, if that is what you're going through, or if you are a support system for someone who does need to recover as well. So I really wanted to say that the biggest ally of COVID, the biggest thing that makes this such a prevalent and impactful issue on the health and wellness of everyone, is because we all want to deny it. And I'm not saying oh, I'm not denying it, you don't know it exists. I mean that you may be denying the fact that it is about to be fall, which is my favorite month. It's actually allowing itself to be fall, but that you are invincible, that you have to keep working, that you can't afford to get sick, that you can't do this. And when you kind of put yourself in that position of denying the fact that this is a new season, there are changes just naturally happening in the environment which affect us as human beings, the change in temperature, the fact that people are going back to school, there's people congregating in large crowds now that may or may not be wearing masks, and then they're coming back to your house, or they're coming into your business, and they're coming into your space, your gym. As a gym goer myself, I'm really contemplating how I'm going to shift given that it's never gone anywhere, but it is also back with a very significant impact, because we are all way more stressed than we were 3.5 years ago before this even popped off. We have not, and I'm saying this from personal experience of my own self, watching my stress level increase and me trying to keep up with it. As someone who lives a very conscious, recovery-based lifestyle, I can barely keep up with the stress, let alone the people that I talk with and the people that I work with as my clients, that their life and then what they report to me about their systems, that their networks that they're attached to, that we are all stressed to a degree that are automatically all in denial of. We can talk about it. We see it. In North Carolina, my condolences to all the people who were impacted by the UNC active shooter this week, and the family of the person that died and was killed, because that in itself is a testament to just how stressed we are, from not only just a perceptions base, we know like, oh, I'm stressed out, but from an internal physiological, neurological place, we are stressed to the point that we can't even see how stressed we are. And I'll be the first one to admit it, that I am just as stressed, but I also live a very intentional lifestyle to make sure that I am not ever to an umpteenth degree of denial about just how stressed I am. And I catch myself about it all the time. Like I've caught myself just being like, oh, wow, I denied myself that reality last week. And now I'm like, oh, maybe I need to readjust myself here. I need to acknowledge that like being in a state of denial is kind of embarrassing. I'm just like, yeah, no, I don't think that's the problem. And then it's the problem. Oopsies. So why I say denial is COVID's best ally is because this is allergy season. If you are living in anywhere where you get seasonal allergies, it is going to be real easy for you to consider that this change of season is just an allergy. And we're still going to be like, oh, I can't afford to miss work. I can't afford to do this. And you're going to be focused on what you can't do and not focused on what's actually happening. That if you have or feel any degree of unwell, and I know that's a big, like, of course I'm unwell. You just said, yes, we're all unwell in some certain regard, but anything abnormal to what your constant normal or your constant baseline is, that is what I'm talking about. If you feel any degree of being unwell, it is not only just your duty to yourself, but your responsibility as a human in this society to sit your ass down. Just sit down. In fact, actually go recline and, get some rest for a little bit. We're going to talk about rest in a little bit, but to sit back and start to really address your stress, because this is what I'm going to break down this talk in the before, during, and after. We talked a little bit about the before, which is denial. Like, check yourself. Really take a good hard look as to what you're not being honest with yourself about, because if you're not honest with yourself, you can't be honest with other people. If you're not honest with the fact that, I don't feel very good today, and you can't be honest with your whole team that if you go and sit at the same table and talk about this project, you're just strewing out virus that potentially could be COVID. Now, before we get there, I want to just make a point here, and I'm not going to talk to you guys about this from like a cellular, what's that word called, epidemiology perspective. Like, that's the technical shit that I don't want to talk about. I'm going to talk to you about it from just the fact of health. You know to what degree of healthy that you guys are. If you're not operating, if you're watching this video, you come to a state of awareness or consciousness that you know that you either could be healthier in these different departments, or you need to work towards that, or you're already actively engaged with those, and you have to start to consider going back and figuring out, okay, how do I maintain the health that I've sustained? When it comes to COVID, you being healthy does not mean as much as you really want it to. I live a very healthy, active lifestyle, but COVID is going to still take you. It is a virus. It's not just some immunity compromised situation. It is something that is going to infiltrate your cellular level and make an impact. And what we've now known from the COVID research and the long-term lasting impact of having COVID, it changes your body. It changes the way that your body functions. And there's a lot of people suffering. I have family members myself who deal with the consequences of long-term damage due to COVID, not intoxication. What's that word? Y'all know what I'm saying. For getting COVID, you get long-term COVID is a thing, and it's a life-altering experience. And I'm not even talking about that experience right now. I'm just talking about the fact that you could be a natural, fun-loving, oh, I like to go out, I need to still have all this fun in the world type of person and be fairly healthy doing it, and still be in the position to have a life-changing circumstance by getting COVID. So that's really the biggest thing is like before, like I'm a very healthy person. It didn't save me. The only thing that it did help with is I know how to take care of myself, and I can be even more intentional with it when I'm sick. But the challenge, let's talk about this. Who likes to be sick? I'm actually really bad at it a lot. Like the first time that I got COVID, so a couple years ago, COVID happened. There's all this like fear about it. I definitely listened to that, but I went up traveling. I defied that. And then I got cocky with it. I got arrogant, but because I can travel and not get COVID, that I can, be a little bit lax with it, because ultimately I do. And there is truth in the fact that you can't live in a state of fear. That's stress in itself, right? As you're constantly activating your stress and you're depleting your immune system simultaneously, just responding to this one, concept of COVID, right? So that's a challenge in itself. But you can't unnecessarily allow that denial to take you out of the reality is that you're still vulnerable. I remember 3 years ago, not only was I dealing with the change of having to, go from a traditional therapist role, have a couch in an office that I drove to, a lifestyle that actually helped me get healthier. I had a commute where I was listening to all my books, that I was dealing with my stress. I lost all of that. I got shifted home. I had to learn a new routine. I had to help other people learn new routines. The only way that I really felt like I had any credibility is because I had started that work 2 years prior to COVID, starting in 2018, where I had started adapting my lifestyle little by little to be able to really accommodate change from a very small level compared to the change that we had to go through with COVID. So as I watched my own life become altered, I also watched the lives of other people who were not prepared for that. And I watched not only people dying, I watched the news here and there. I watched people lose loved ones. I watched my clients have people lose their jobs. I watched people their biochemistry start to change, because when we lose something as simple as a routine that we enjoyed, like going to work, driving, I actually started to learn to like traffic because it made me slow down, and it held me accountable to taking care of myself and being calm versus flying down the highway at 85 miles an hour for no freaking reason, increasing the risk to my life. I started to enjoy that. I started seeing other people who had made positive change start to backtrack because they lost their job. They had to go sit in front of a screen all day. They lost social contact. And that one thing in itself, we're not even on the virus right now. We're just on the consequence of the virus. That one change in itself led to a completely different biochemistry that they didn't know how to navigate. They had a little bit of a chance because they had me, but I didn't go to med school. I've learned a lot from doctors. I know a lot of things, but I can't give medical advice. I can give clinical advice and recommend, actually, let me rephrase that. I can give clinical recommendations about what could be beneficial to try to be able to alter behaviorally the impact of something in genetically. And some of it works, but it takes a while. Just like, yeah, anyways, I could go on for days with that. But my point being is that being healthy won't save you, but being healthy will protect you in a lot of ways because you already have a familiarity with these, like with that routine. Now, if you do not, and you're not the healthiest person, where a realistic place you can start is always reducing your stress, whether that's external stress and being exposed to the things that are really not necessary for you to be exposed to. And I understand not everyone can, you can't quit your job, you can't do that. So if you can't reduce external stressors, you always start with yourself. You finding a routine. If you need one, I've got one on my website. My sleep hygiene routine is specifically designed to reduce stress from the internal, from the muscular, mental, spiritual level every single night. That will reduce your imprint on your own stress level. Getting those, you can always start a new routine. You don't have to be consistent with it yet. So my clients all the time, you have to be inconsistent to know the consistency, because life, you're going to be able to be consistent, but you have to span it out over time. You have to be like, okay, well, this week I was consistent doing it 3 times. It may not have been consistent every single night, but that's 1 week where I did it 3 times. So next week I have to do it at least 3 times. If I do it twice, well, I did it twice. You are consistent when you do not give up. Every time that you skip a day, you try to put it back in your day that next day. If you forget about it, well, eventually this is your sign to remember it. Go get that sleep hygiene routine. Sleep is really where you rebalance a lot of the hormones that get dysregulated by your exposure to stress. And we're all freaking stressed. We're all stressed. Let me take a pause here because I've been stressing myself out. I need to breathe. So before COVID even is there, right? We're at this place. If you don't have COVID, thank the Lord, or thank, you don't have to thank anyone. I'm just glad you don't have COVID, right? But this is your time where during this season of things are going to be booming. Again, my prediction is, even if it doesn't come true, I'm going to operate like it's going to happen, because guess what? It's a reality that we live in. This virus exists now. Whoever made it, however it came to be, it exists now. So you having a preventative health routine to address and to prepare yourself that if this were to ever happen, it's a win-win. Because if it's not COVID, it's just your general life that you need to address, helping and getting yourself in a preventative mode for stress. So before COVID even enters and knocks on your door, which hopefully it will not, you getting a stress management routine that's built into your already natural routine of going to sleep, waking up in the morning, and you having that in itself will set the tone for something that you can't control. You can't control COVID, coming into your life. I barely even leave the house. I go to the gym and I don't even, I wipe off everything. I'm very careful there, but it was my housemate that their exposure put me at compromise. So you can't necessarily control the lives of other people. You can only control and prepare yourself for what you can't control. So that's before. The during. Let's talk about what this experience is like and what COVID as a virus, not necessarily all the statistics, but what that experience actually is. So if you've never had it, if you've been sick, you've got some kind of idea. If you have had a common cold, the first thing that happens is that your energy levels tank. You'll be able to feel that. That's different than allergies. Allergies is a upper body and head experience. COVID is a, why the hell do I feel like I'm dragging a box of rocks behind me? It takes you out. And anytime that your body has to do extra work, the energy reserves for how much you need to do cognitively, how much you can do physically, how much you can do on automatic. Everything that's on autopilot in your body has to reserve energy. So good visual for this is if you've ever seen that movie, and when I say that movie, I mean all the movies where the power goes out. You've seen some movie where people are talking in a room and all that goes like, and all the lights go out, the generator, like the little lights come on. That's ultimately what your body has to do. So your brain activity, reserve energy, your physical activity, your body's going to start reserving energy as much as possible. You're likely going to lose your appetite. You're not going to have hunger cues. And that's if you're not dealing with attention deficit disorder of some kind, and you actually know your hunger cues. Some people are likely to stop eating. That is something you do not want to do. Your body needs energy. Food is how we get our energy and our nutrients. So you want to start making sure that just because you're not hungry, that you have the ability to still nourish your body throughout this. That was one thing that I've seen a lot of, like, we don't get that education very clearly into what food actually is for our bodies. And then if you did get that education, if you have any kind of emotional disturbance and you use food as a coping skill, like me, that it takes itself out of context. So for me, I wouldn't say I ended up overeating, but because I felt so tired and I do turn to food as a primary source of fuel because I live an active lifestyle, then I ended up was eating the same amount of food, and I had to be mindful to not sit there and overeat because I wasn't keeping myself busy with work like I typically do. That would keep me out of the freaking kitchen. So when you're doing and you're going through and dealing with COVID, whether it's someone in your house or someone there, please be respectful to the reality that you are not going to have as much energy to do the things that you typically have the urge to do. And you're potentially going to fight that. We are all defiant beings. Even the most compliant, go with the flow kind of person can become defiant. That's a natural human behavior. Oppositional defiant disorder is when we usually have a resistance to the resistance of defiance, but that's a whole other story. But the point being is that when you have an internal resistance because your energy is low, because your body needs to heal and to fight off this invader and this intruder, your life is about to look very freaking different. And if you're anything like me, I can't stand it. For me, it's like, so this weekend, right? If y'all go watch my live on Friday, and you could probably hear it in my voice, I even said, I was like, oh man, my roommate's got COVID. I think I'm about to come down with something. I stayed in the bed for the rest of and I didn't have at that point one day for me. I was like, okay, I can relax. But I am sometimes so all the time of having to run my business. And I have self-care and stress management and relaxation time built into my schedule. But to go into doing that lifestyle and having to be in rest mode, y'all, that is a tough one for Sara. Tough. Very, very tough. So just be mindful that naturally in itself is a loss right there. So if we're talking about how do you get through COVID, Sara, if I could sum it up for you, it's really starting to sound like you just need to start grieving and know that you're in grief mode, because it is you losing the reality of your expectation for your day. I was very flustered because, one, I got sick. Two, I got sick out of my own control. Like if I had been out there in the streets and doing something fun, I've been like, all right, cool. Well, it's just a consequence of what has happened. But it took me off guard. So I was already in a place of being unsuspecting. So I got irritated. And that right there put stress on my body by nothing else other than myself. So that's where it's like when we talk about stress, if you can learn not only just what your triggers are, how to manage it, but then we also have to learn the difference between what is maintaining and managing stress and what is getting rid of the backlog of stress and rebalancing from our exposure to stress from the last 3.5 years, from the last 24 hours of you just being outside and going to the grocery store. Because if you ever ran into someone who is doing stressful things, or if you ever just sat in traffic, you're exposed to stress. And we absorb that, we internalize that, and in turn causes imbalances for us that we're now responsible for. Okay, so fueling your body making sure that you're eating foods that are low in processed sugar, that are that have our natural and whole foods as much as possible, because you need vitamins, you need minerals, and you need to boost your immune system. It's not just pounding the orange juice. Orange juice has so much added sugar in it, so make sure you read your labels to be able to make sure that you're boosting your immune system appropriately. One thing that I want to make sure I say too is that a lot of people think, like, when you're sick, ginger ale is the cure. That has been proven as a myth. That is now ginger in itself, and natural ginger ale that is made with natural whole organic ginger that has less added sugars in it, and that's not soda, may actually have some impact for your immune system. But getting as natural as possible, something natural is happening to you. Just throwing something pharmaceutical at it, or based on like something that you like in a comfort food, is actually not doing you any justice to be able to actually heal and get better. Now, that's not to speak, I'm not going to have an opinion on the, what's it called? Plaxavid, or basically there is an antiviral medication that has been developed since COVID has. That's the one thing about a new virus, is that, and the benefit of science and technology is that we can have interventions that can help us. It will stop, from the research that I've done, it looks like it stops the virus from being able to multiply to the point where your body can kind of get, a little bit of cred and some skin in the game with trying to heal. But if you do not want to take that medication, it's not going to cure anything. You still have to rest. You still have to decrease your stress, and you still have to nourish your body so that your body can pull the nutrients it needs from being depleted, because more than likely you weren't taking care of yourself before. So starting it right now is going to just be an opportunity for you, because you're not at work. You can't be at work with positive COVID tests. So you become the work. Being sick is your biggest opportunity to start redirecting and recorrecting some old self-care poor habits. So I got off on a tangent, right? Ginger ale is not going to take care of you. It's a myth. It has so much processed sugar in it to the point where you're not really getting the natural effects of what ginger can do for your immune system. But do some research on your own, right? Google in, like, do ginger and immunity, and you'll see and kind of come up with these things about gut health. Your immune system lives in your gut. Your gut, there's a reason that particular spidey sense happens, like trust your gut. Your immune system is there too, and it's guiding you, and it needs to be taken care of. So when you put things in that cause flames, so sugar, processed carbohydrates, gluten, sometimes depending on whether you're intolerant to it, when you put things in your body that cause it to have more work because you feel like you want to eat that, because I know when I'm sick, I want comfort food. I want chocolate. I want those things, but they're not going to actually be helping me to deal with and conserve the energy that my body's already doing. They're actually going to use more energy to be able to have to be processed. So something to keep in mind, that if you feel compelled not to eat when you're sick, you have to fight that urge, because your body needs fuel, it needs protein, it needs nourishment when you are sick. Now I want to just talk a little bit about, with COVID, right? The difference between rest and sleep. I stayed in the bed this past weekend more than I probably have in like the last 6 months of my life. Like, it was humbling, and I had to force myself to be there. And when I say that, it didn't mean that it was hard, but it was difficult for me to lay there all day. But the thing is that I wasn't actually, I had to call myself, and I'm going to call myself right out here on tape, is that I wasn't actually resting. I was watching Netflix all the time, and I found myself not being able to sleep. Not at night. Like, I can sleep at night, no problem. I got that down pat. I trained myself. But I was laying there for 6 hours one day, constantly and mentally on, because I was watching a show, because I don't ever have the opportunity to just be sick. Like, no one wants to be sick, but when we're sick, we're good at it. We can be sick. We can sit there. Because we're like, oh man, I don't get this time. I get to catch up on my shows and all that. It is something that I have to be honest with myself and then honest with y'all about, is that when you're trying to heal, watching Netflix is keeping your mind distracted from the fact that you're not eating, or you're overeating because you're laying in bed all day. And if you're an overeater, a binge eater, and you're in an active cycle of that, it's harder to break. And so resting, and that's the same thing with reading. You could be in bed and reading all day. Mentally, you're on, and it's potentially could be causing you stress that we just got done talking about, how that infiltrates and how it damages your immune system to be able to recover. So be careful about how much, just because you're resting, just because you're sleeping, you're able to sleep, doesn't mean that you're actually getting the quality of sleep. And that if you are in bed or if you're resting on the couch and recovering from COVID, that you are not just on a screen all day, because that right there is an infiltration of, and causing stress from a very minute, discrete standpoint. It's going under the radar, that most people don't realize is perpetuating their stress. You may not feel stressed, but feeling stressed is the last resort to what you're going to realize before you realize you're stressed. Like having, I saw this is a good example with my background. Having an addiction, the addiction is not the problem. It's what you weren't paying attention to that led to the addiction that is the actual problem. So the same thing with stress, and stress is usually the biggest contributing factor to an addiction, is that we're not in preventative stress mode. We're not taking care of ourselves to the point that once we get so stressed that we're looking outside of ourselves to be able to reduce what we have to control inside of ourselves. So when you're exposing yourself to television all day, you're watching a series, you're doing, and you're having fun, like those are relaxing things. I'm not saying you can't do them, but doing and being mindful of how much you do that while you're resting is going to contribute to just how fast you can recover from COVID. Okay, so there's a big difference between resting and sleep in that regard. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat there. So that's the during. I figure, like, for me this time around, I was super irritable. And I'm going to wing it on this one, but for anyone who is a support system of someone who's recovering from COVID, brain fog is probably one of the more common symptoms of COVID. And we can feel that. But when we're clouded, we don't necessarily see the impact of what that has on our mood, on our communication with other people. And then if you ever happen to have COVID and going through, as a female, any other hormonal changes during the month, it's a double whammy and y'all are in for it. Okay. So be mindful for a support system. I'm speaking to the people who have to be around other people who are going through COVID. This is a time where you have to not take anything personally, but be also paying attention to hear what people are saying. What they're saying to you is probably not going to be the nicest thing, because their irritability is going to be up. Their energy reserves are depleted. You're not going to be able to have the brain's ability to have an executive functioning and conscious choice to be mindful and to have those words be said kindly sometimes. This is not an excuse. If they do some unkind shit, you need to address that, but also remember that you also don't have to take it personally. You do not have to become reactive and let that transmission of stress come from one person suffering over into you and make it your suffering. All you need to do is be mindful and of that person's particular state, and then just try not to do anything mindless about it. Right? Like, use your best judgment at that point. Don't do things that you wouldn't want to be done to you if you were in a mood of some sort that you just couldn't shake, because that person literally can't get rid of what it is that you're wanting them to get rid of just like that. Their body is in an altered state of being. So that is because I know my irritability, I went into a hole because I could see I had one phone call with a friend of mine that, bless his heart, he got the brunt of it, but it also made me pay attention. Like I can't answer my phone. And I'm a very pretty conscious person, which is why I feel comfortable saying this thing. I'm not going to say I'm a COVID expert. I'm not talking about the statistics and what it does to the cell, but it's the human experience of what I've watched other people and myself go through, that we have to start taking more responsibility about what it is that we need to do to prevent our suffering affecting other people. Because you're suffer all the time. Like that is part of the number one shared experience of life is suffering. So if you're not paying attention to how you impact someone else, that's an energetic transmission that still you have responsibility for. You may be able to compartmentalize it and not think about it, but then you're ultimately going to overthink about it, or you're going to use energy to try to compartmentalize it. So point being, don't answer the phone. And don't text all the time either. You're supposed to be resting. Excuse me, COVID cough. Being mindful of, how that was tough for me, because I'm on the phone a lot of the time, or I'm in my email, and not being connected to what it is that gives you true purpose in the day, whether you like your job or not. Having a role, having a purpose for that day is super impactful to your mental health. It doesn't matter what you do, if you lose that during COVID, it's going to severely affect your mental health and everyone else around you. So if I had to give you one tip for going through COVID, don't answer the phone. Just don't. And unless you are really prepared for what is about to happen, and try to reduce the amount of conversations that you have exposure to, because you may be bored, but guess what? You need to rest, and you have a reason to, because if you don't, it's just going to make it worse for you and make it worse for everyone else. So let's talk about post-COVID. At this point, I'm like post-COVID, but I'm still, it's going to be going on to the degree of where I find another balance to my life. I don't know how long that's going to take, but I'm trying to think of like, okay, if I had to give y'all advice, right? Everyone comes to therapists, like, we don't give advice, but I'm going to take my own risk and give you some advice. The first thing is that you have to maintain that honesty with yourself at all times. We talked at the beginning a little bit about like COVID's biggest ally is denial, is that we want to paint this pretty picture for ourselves. So like, okay, I'm better and I can do this. You got to be honest with yourself. You just went through a really hard experience from a cellular level, and you don't even know the impact yet. You just know that you have a negative test and you got to go back to work because you got to pay your bills. Being honest with yourself is going to look like making sure that you are honest, not about your limitations, but about knowing not where you're prone to pushing yourself too far. That was my first go around with COVID 2 years ago that I had. I finally got me on my second trip that I had taken. I don't remember what variant it was, but I had already had the booster. I tried to push through my work. I was seeing clients. I was just trying to take it easy. I work from home, so I was able to trick myself into thinking like, oh, well, I don't have a very stressful job and I love my job. What's the point? Well, when you work with teenagers, this is why I don't have to have children to know what it's like to have children, is because my clients tell me about it, but I also have teenagers who I am working with, and they will be brutally honest with you. I remember that my client at the time, she's like 18, 19 years old, and she's like, Sarah, what are you even saying? And I was like, oh shit. I was like, what are you talking about? She was like, you're not yourself today. And I was like, well, probably because I do have COVID. Like I told you that. I was like, yeah. But she was just straight raw with me. And when we were done with that session, I had to sit back and be like, and I reflected on it. I was like, yeah, I guess I did stumble over my words a little bit more. But I was like, no, I'm going to keep going. Whatever. She didn't know what she's talking about. Yeah, she knew what she was talking about. I was not in my right mind. And it's still, I don't get embarrassed a lot these days because I purposely embarrass myself sometimes, but I now remind myself even more how important being honest with myself and letting other people's perceptions. This is why I don't say don't listen to anyone's negative feedback. You have to learn how to deal with negative feedback, or else you're going to miss something about you that's playing off a perspective in a form of denial that you're not going to be able to see yourself. I had to take her constructive criticism into consideration for me to realize, like, oh, yeah, I'm not really actually taking care of myself doing this. I may have rested. I may have gone from having 4 clients today to 2. I may have cut my day in half. But why am I still having this pressure of performing and of this at this standard that I'm used to when I'm in a healthier state of being? Now, mind you, I still was in a healthier state. Actually, I probably, I don't know to what degree of comparison of health I was back then to where I am now. I'd say I have improved some, but I was still doing unhealthy things. I was still limiting myself from being honest with myself about where I was and asking for feedback. We don't intentionally go wanting the truth. We ask for feedback, but when someone gives us the truth, we resist it because it sometimes can hurt our feelings. So if you are honest with yourself and do some reflection and then intentionally go look for feedback, you may get a different result there. My next tip here is patience. Figure out how you can practice patience in any regard during this time of recovery. Patience is not something that is naturally given to people. There's some people who are naturally good at it, but there is no person on this earth who is exempt from practicing how to be patient. Because you're going to be able to have, you need to have that skill in your toolbox to be able to apply it when you want to get work done. You want to stay focused on something. You want to be able to go out and get your lashes done when you look like a hot freaking mess, and you have to practice patience. You have to know how to put yourself back in the seat of and being peaceful and calm, because then if you don't, then you're kind of starting fresh on that stress management again. So remind yourself, okay, I have to practice patience. Becomes your little mini mantra for the moment. And it's like patience, practice patience. Pace around the house if you need to. There's nothing wrong with pacing. May piss someone else off, but for you, if you have that energy of stress, you have to get it out. You have to practice that patience. And my last one is perseverance. Now, that does not mean to just sit there and endure the storm. That means to see that the storm is going on and to stand up when the storm is happening. You got COVID. You didn't break your legs. You got COVID and you're tired. You're not dying. Hopefully you're not anyway. You being able to persevere, to be able to stand up and do one extra thing that you typically don't feel like doing. So if you don't feel like getting out of bed, making sure that you get out of bed intentionally to be able to go to the kitchen, to fuel yourself, to feed yourself. That is you aligning with perseverance in some way, shape, or form. And I would encourage you guys to remember that, because it is going to be an uphill battle. I'm still trying to, I guess it's the 7-day mark, because I don't really know when I actually got it. It was either probably Thursday or Friday of last week. And Saturday, Sunday, I still tested positive on Monday. Like I said, Thursday was the first negative test that I got. And my lung capacity is shrunk. I have to do my breath training again. I used to do 15-20 minutes on the Stairmaster a week and a half ago. I can probably still get back there in a short period of time, but my expectation to be able to go back into the gym, one, it's not going to happen right now. But if I were to go back and meet my own expectations, start where I left off, I would be humbled probably very quickly, because my lung, when we take short, shallow breaths for a long period of time, because you're coughing, if you take too big of a breath, your lungs start to accommodate that short breath. They don't expand as much. So breath training is something that of perseverance. You can do that laying. That's part of resting, is because you're actually taking in more oxygen over time and doing some more natural respiratory therapy. So the box breathing technique is not only just for stress management, for sleep initiation, for stress reduction from mindfulness, it's actually respiratory training. You just don't have one of those cool little devices that you blow into. However, sorry, this is like real salesy moment, is that if you wanted a little device to blow into, this is really good actually for anxiety. I do have a code that y'all can use, but Calm-A-Go is one of those things that's almost like a little respiratory, buddy in your pocket, but it is for mindfulness. But it could work for you retraining yourself to breathe after COVID. It does have a rattle, if you think about it. So when you blow, it's activating. That's where the mindfulness component comes in. But you guys can go on my website. I have a blog post that explains what Calm-A-Go is for a stress management PTSD tool. But when it comes to COVID, yeah, it can help you retrain your lung capacity. So if you are a smoker on top of having COVID, I don't need to say anything, right? Like, that's part of being honest with yourself. I'm not going to I probably do need to tell someone to stop and reduce your smoking just as a lifestyle completely. But I understand that is complicated, but you need to definitely start paying attention to what that is going to do if you have something that compromises your health at the same time and your lungs, because COVID's coming for you. It's not coming for you, but it's excuse me, it's coming for the things that actually make you live. It's not just sickness. It is probably the one thing that, we're so on guard for people taking from us that we don't even realize when we're taking from ourselves, that we don't realize the restrictions that we live under because we're so focused on everyone else and how they're restricting us or how they're taking from us. But you're the one robbing yourself of oxygen just by not giving an honest perspective of life to yourself, that you're stressed. I don't want to say it's that simple. It's that simple, but it's also that complicated. Paying attention to yourself is the best and the secret sauce of life. You're going to get so much. And being selfish. You got people out here being selfish to a degree where they're realizing they're doing it out of defense of someone taking from them. That's what the narcissists are, is that they block themselves off from the truth and the reality that other people have of them, and it's not serving them. So they're being extra selfish because they don't know how to be selfish and in a lack and not overcompensate for it. So when you're intentional about taking care of yourself from the inside out, it balances out. So that's all I got for y'all. 47 minutes of talking, and I only coughed twice. So this is also part of my training. If you guys see my schedule from this week, thankfully the universe took Monday off my schedule. I had one client, but Tuesday I had 2 clients. Wednesday I had 4, but they were spaced out with an hour in between, so I wasn't talking back to back. And then yesterday I actually had 6, and I got through it okay. I'm a little tired today, but I already have my plan for today of how I'm going to balance that rest, that I expended that energy and I had rested with COVID, but it's a different type of rest. And also trying to get outside, staying in bed, part of that perseverance, get outside. If you can't go to the gym, you do have to walk. Just because you got COVID does not mean that you can't go for a walk. And enjoy this weather. It's fall, y'all. It's sweater weather. Oh, not quite yet, actually. But it's going to be sweater weather. It's going to be sweater weather a lot soon. So I hope you guys got something out of that. Thank you, Cedric, for the feedback. I'm glad I could actually help with some good information and perspective. That is just skimming the surface of if you don't have COVID, let alone the whole lifestyle that has to go with what COVID has done to us socially and fundamentally as human beings in this society. But that's another talk for another time. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your Friday. Enjoy Labor Day and the long weekend. And I will see you next week.